called Betty's Diner. It's taken off the Cucumbers album, Kindred Spirits. And the point that I think that this beautiful song makes is that the divine and God is with us in all of our ordinary lives. Miranda works the late night counter, little joint called Betty's Diner. Chrome and checker tablecloths, one steamy window pane. She got the job that shaky fall, and after hours she'll ride till dawn. With a nod and smile she serves them all. Here we are all in one place, the wants and wounds of the human race. Despair and hope sit face to face when you come in from the cold. Let us fill your cup with something kind, eggs and toast like bread and wine. She's heard it all, so she don't mind.
Arthur lettuces, Earl Grey's tea, since April, it's been hard to sleep. You know they tried most everything, but it took her in the end.
Kevin tests new saxophones when he swears he's leaving quality control with the Chicago scene or New Orleans, where they still play righteous horns.
Here we are all in one place, the wants and wounds of the human race. Despair and hope sit face to face when you come in from the cold. Let her fill your cup with something kind, eggs and toast like bread and wine. She's heard it all, so she don't mind.
Jack studies here after work to get past high school. He's the first. His big hands look comfortable with a hammer or a pen.
And Emma leaned and kissed his cheek, and when she did, his knees got weak. Miranda smiles at Emma and winks. Here we are all in one place, the wants and wounds of the human race. Despair and hope sit
this presence of Miranda. Miranda is essentially the presence of God in times of trouble. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear nothing, for thou, Miranda, art with me. And the diner itself, it's a beautiful image. I don't know how many of us frequent diners anymore, but really, the diner is one place where that kind of encounter with God happens. It happens in church sometimes. It happens in our homes, in our kitchens, wherever we find healing, wherever God prepares a table in the presence of our enemies. Despair and hope sit face to face at the table. Did you hear that? Sometimes the diner is right here in the mind. Despair and hope together in the mind. And so this sermon today is an effort from the pastor to turn the switch on, the open switch in the diner, to illuminate this reality of despair and hope at the same table in church, at the same table in a diner, at the same table of the mind. To turn on that switch, that light, to suggest that God is with us in the midst of the darkness. To talk plainly about depression. And I decided to preach about depression this week after hearing Kristen share last week during our Joys and Concerns of a neighbor who had overdosed. And I recognize that I have had neighbors who have overdosed. We have all had neighbors who have overdosed. And it felt like it was time to talk about depression. It helps when high-profile people talk about their depression. This is a critical issue for us. 11% of people under 18, 11% of people under 18 report that they experience depression. And just so that we don't think that this is just a kind of a youngster's problem with coping with the difficulties of life, 10% of people over the age of 65 struggle with depression. 30% of college students report depression. 50% of the people who are depressed choose not to seek help for their major depression. 50%. That's why I'm preaching about this today. 50% choose not to seek help. So it does help to put a face sometimes on depression. In fact, I think it's important for those of us who are willing to come out, to share our experiences of depression. I was listening to NPR this week on Wednesday. Bruce Springsteen was sharing his story, his memoir. And this memoir is called Born to Run. And because so much of the memoir is about his depression, the idea of Born to Run really makes you think about the despair and the hope that causes us to run. But he shares a story of how depression has come toward him again and again in his life, and even at the point of being 60, it still came out again, which surprised him given all the success he'd enjoyed in life. But he says when he was 60, it was like the light went out inside of him, and there was a hollowness inside. He said he used to really resent waking up in the morning because it meant that the light was coming up, and it meant that other people were going on with their breakfast and their work and with their friendships and with their laughter. But he couldn't get out of bed, Bruce Springsteen said. And he tried to hide it. Bruce Springsteen said, I tried to hide it from everyone, including myself. He said, but the tears still came. And he said, buckets of tears, oceans of tears at all times. And he said these are tears that were Bambi tears, Old Yeller tears. Do you understand? Fried green tomato tears. And he couldn't stop them. And then he said that he called up his psychiatrist at one of those moments when he was deep, deep in this dark place, bad thought surfacing. And the psychiatrist said, it's okay to take this pill that I gave you. He already had the pill, but he didn't feel like he should take this. And the psychiatrist said, take this pill. And he said, 3 days, one pill later, he emerged from the darkness. And he recognizes that he's going to have to emerge and reemerge and reemerge. The author Kay Redfield Janison had a phrase for that. She wrote a book called The Unquiet Mind. The Unquiet Mind, which is a book about memoir of moods is what it's called. But it's a book about her own struggle with bipolar disease. And she says that she's a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and it was a big deal for her to come out, to share with people that she experienced this bipolar, what we used to call manic depression. But her experience was that she felt irritable and angry, frightened, and she said that she was enmeshed totally in the blackest caves of the mind. You never knew these caves were even there, she said. I'm grateful for Kay and for Bruce for coming out, for sharing their stories, and also for sharing the importance of seeking some medication for this. That's a change for me. I didn't always trust that medication was the right solution. I'm a talking kind of guy. You just kind of talk your way through some of these things. But I was contributing to a way of thinking about mental illness that further isolated people, that prevented those 50% of people from coming out and trying to find some means for coping with it. I grew up on the idea, like it's expressed by a televangelist, John Hagee, and he was talking about depression a couple of Sundays ago. And he used this particular story from 2 Kings. It's another story about leprosy, or lepers. You heard one story here from the gospel. This is a story that he pulled out of this well, this dark place in 2 Kings. And it's a story of 4 lepers who were outside of a city in Samaria, a Samaritan city. And these 4 people are there at a time where the Samaritan city is under siege. A nation state is allied against this Samaritan city, and so there's famine in the land. And these 4 lepers talk to each other and they say, well, we're starving out here, outside of the city, and we'd be starving if we went into the city, so let's just go to the enemy's camp, and maybe they'll have mercy on us. And what they find when these 4 people with leprosy go into the enemy's camp is that nobody is there. The army has fled. Still the horses are there, the chariots are there, the clothing is there, and there's this trail of clothing leaving town, the scripture tells people. And so somehow the enemy just heard some kind of bright sound or loud sound, and they fled. And so John Hagee says, this is the approach we need to have to depression. That we just need to take a good look at whether the army is really there. And we need to have the courage to go and to find out that there's no army, that there's no enemy. This is a variation of the idea that it's all in your head. That there's really nobody there. That if you're just strong enough, bold enough, that you can break right through this. It was expressed by a presidential candidate who talked about PTSD. You heard this story. The suggestion was that those who had committed suicide with PTSD couldn't handle it. They couldn't handle the PTSD. As if anyone can. It's this way of thinking that if we just work hard enough at it, if we just are just persistent, one day we'll recognize that there was really no enemy there. That it was all in our head, and we'll become well. I used to think something like that back in the day, but I resent that way of thinking now. A better story is the story that you just heard from the gospel today. It's an encounter that Jesus has with 10 people who are lepers. And there are 2 things that I want you to hear from that story. The first is when Jesus tells these 10 people, go show yourselves to the priests. Go show yourselves to the priests. Why is that important? Jesus is offering a mechanism to help them to move away from their self-exile. People with leprosy exiled themselves. Sometimes they were sent out of the city, but often they would simply exile themselves. And so Jesus is offering a mechanism for bringing them back into the community. If a person had some kind of skin irritation, and you in this room have had some kind of skin irritation, any kind of skin irritation, you feared that it might be leprosy. So it could be eczema, it could be psoriasis, it could be shingles, it could be acne, it could be leprosy. I learned that there's a condition called vitiligo, which is a condition that Michael Jackson had. It lightened the skin. Michael Jackson talked about this on Oprah Winfrey, how his skin was lightening in patches, which is why he lightened all of his skin. If a person had this kind of skin disease, they would often exile themselves out of the city for fear of ostracism. And so there was a mechanism in Jewish law that it allowed a person to be viewed by a priest, so the priest could determine what exactly we're dealing with. That's part of the beauty of the scripture. It gives us an opportunity to talk about what exactly are we dealing with here. We don't know unless we expose, shed some light on this thing that we're feeling, the despair and the hope. And so the first beautiful part of the scripture is Jesus encountering people outside the city and telling people, reminding them of this mechanism that brings them back from self-imposed exile. Come out. Come back. Come to the priests. Show yourself. That's the first invitation today, is show yourself. The second invitation, and surprising invitation, is this idea that they were healed on the way. Did you notice that? That they experienced healing somehow on the way. They weren't healed by Jesus. You know, we've seen faith healers on TV, they just place hands on the shoulders and you're healed. Jesus isn't the one who does it. Televangelists aren't the ones who do it. Not even the priests were the ones who offered the healing, which is a good thing. I come from a Methodist tradition. John Wesley is our founder. John Wesley wrote a book about home remedies for different kinds of ailments that we might have. And he had a cure for lunacy. The cure for lunacy was to take some vinegar and to rub it on a person's head. And his cure for full-on madness, and that's the word that he used for it, the cure for madness was to take water from a hot tea kettle and pour that over the head, Jim. We don't always have the best solutions to some of these things, especially the priests. But what Jesus is telling us here is that there is healing in the universe itself. That the means for healing are actually all around us. They're not just located in the hands of one holy one or one person in a particular office. They may have tools to offer you to try. But that the healing is actually built into many corners of the universe. We're healed along the way. And I wanted to share my story with you of a time of darkness for me, the way that this healing kind of emerged for me. When I was transferring from Chicago to New England, we went to the town of Lynn. And my role was to work alongside my partner in ministry there to combine 4 of these churches together. And we had, as we really started this ministry, there were 2 main sites of ministry. There was the one where we met for worship, and there was the other site that we held on to as kind of an urban center. We didn't really know what we wanted to do with that building, so it remained mostly dark, this big, dark building. My partner got to stay in the nice light building where all the worship happened, and I got to stay in the dark building. And I recognized that I was experiencing this kind of despair every morning, waking up knowing I had to go into that building that didn't have a clear mission or purpose. I didn't have a clear mission or purpose. And I was physically in a dark space, and I'd left behind all of the people that I knew in Chicago, and people in New England aren't always the most friendly folk. And so I found it very difficult making friendship with folks in Lynn. And so there I was in this dark hall. My office was just off of the hall, and felt this deep sadness. And so I visited a psychiatrist in Lynn. And his advice, after a few sessions to understand a little bit of where I'm coming from and my family history, depression does run in the family. It did for Bruce. After understanding my family history, he offered 2 words of advice. One thing he suggested I do was that I think of some relative that I could visit. I mean, he recognized I was isolated from all of my family. They're all down in Texas or California or Florida. He said, find one relative that you can visit. Why? The relative knows you, knows your roots, gives you this sense of purpose. I didn't really understand why he was suggesting this. But even in the thought of going to visit my family, it occurred to me that I had this kind of network of people who knew me when. And our relationships in my family are imperfect, like they are in yours.
But I knew that there was this kind of grounding, this sort of connection. So I didn't even have to visit my aunt to begin to feel this sense of being drawn towards some kind of light. It's in the fabric of the universe, this kindness that gets poured into our cup. In that song, the idea of coming in from the cold, let her fill your cup with something kind. That the kindness is there in the universe. And so I already started to sense that kindness, even in the midst of the darkness. And then the psychotherapist had this other suggestion. After I explained this big cave that I was working in every day, he said, do you have any lights there? Because I felt like I shouldn't turn on lights because we shouldn't use up too much power in this place. So I sat there in the dark, because the other building has the worship and the other offices. And so I sat there in the dark. He said, turn on a light. What he said to me was, find a room across the hall and turn on a light switch and maybe put a radio in that room so that there's some sound there to remind you that you're not alone, that you're part of the human community. And so what I would do, taking this advice, was to leave my office after I set things up in the morning, and I would walk across the dark hall toward that room, and I would sing this song. We are marching in the light of God. We are marching in the light of God. All the way to that room, flipping on the switch, and all the way back again. You would hear this crazy pastor singing out, because we're all crazy, singing out, we are marching in the light of God. And I'm going to invite you to sing that song with me. I meant to look for my guitar earlier, and it seems to have disappeared, so we'll do that a cappella. What I want to leave you with is a word of gratitude and thanksgiving for people in this church who have come out to me about their depression. October 11th is Coming Out Day. It's the day when gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people will take that risk and come out, not only for their own well-being, but also for the well-being of their community. It's important to come out, to let people know the reality. So I am thankful for many people in this church who have come out to me with a sign of their depression. Remember, it's something like 10%, if not more, of the people in a room are struggling with depression. That means 10 people in this room are struggling with depression. Thank you for coming out to me and sharing some of your struggle. I'm grateful for Kay, for coming out as a professor at Johns Hopkins, for taking that risk of saying, I'm bipolar. For Bruce Springsteen to write an entire memoir. His life's work expresses how profound his depression has been. What a tremendous risk and an important gift to share that with all of us. And so I leave you with a story from Bruce. This is how he ended his book. Bruce, after struggling with depression his whole life, felt compelled to go back to his hometown in New Jersey. And he visits the house where it all started, where a lot of his depression started. He was essentially kicked out of that house. His grandparents, with whom he lived, both died too early for him. And his depression started there in that house. And so he went back to confront some of those feelings around that house. And when he did, he noticed how close the house was to the Catholic Church. This church that gave him the images, the language, the framework for understanding both despair and hope. That was the table for him in the presence of my enemies. And so when he parked out in front of this Catholic church, the prayer came back to him. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. Deliver us from evil. All of us, is what he said. Deliver us from evil. Brothers and sisters, evil is pain. And maybe for many of us, there is no complete removal of pain from our lives. But God sets a table in the presence of our enemies, and God supports us. And so my prayer today is that you will feel a sense of release by coming out, by sharing that. In this context, sharing with a psychotherapist, sharing it with a trusted family member or friend, that you would find the means for coming out of the shadows in the name of Jesus Christ.